Hey everybody, today we're going to be doing some artist trading cards using Blacklight art. For those of you that don't know, Blacklight art is based on ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is invisible to the human eye, but it does make certain colors, luminescent colors, fluorescent colors, glow in the dark. It's a pretty neat trick. It's used a lot of the time for amusement park rides or Halloween type themes or decorating bedrooms if you like that kind of thing. And today we're going to do a few easy to learn stencil blacklight art pieces. First, let's talk about some of the materials. We're going to be using the Strathmore Bristle board and Strathmore illustration board. The reason we have two different ones is that I use the Bristol to cut out my stencils. It's a good, perfect weight to cut the stencil so that it still holds itself well under the paint, but is still easy enough to cut. And the illustration board I like because it has a nice hard surface. And the reason that's important is because of the paints we're using today, most importantly. When doing blacklight art, fine blacklight art at that, I like to use the Turner acrylic gouache. The reason I like to use this stuff is they have a beautiful matte finish, and it really lends itself to a great pop underneath those black lights. And I would highly recommend, when using these, to use them on a hard surface because they are not as flexible as traditional acrylics, and it will just guarantee it will last longer if it's a hard surface. So I went ahead and used the illustration board. Now, to get started, the first thing I like to do is take one of these boards and I just apply a very thin coat of gesso. If you look at this card, which I pre-prepared, you can barely see this side's gessoed and this side isn't. And besides the circle I made for my art, you can barely tell the difference. So it's just a very thin layer. And the reason that I like to apply a thin layer to the board is because paper's thirsty. And if I was to apply the paint straight to it, it would still work, but it would draw some of that color into the paper, where I'd much rather have the color seen by my viewers. So by putting the gesso on top, I kind of seal that and let the color sit on the very top surface so the colors stay nice and bright. So we have that ready to go, and I've already prepared this. Again, just gessoed it and did a little circle. You can use anything you want. You can use bottle caps. You can use, I think I used a shot glass. And to make your stencils, what I did was I took the Bristol and I found a design on the internet that I liked and just basically cut it out using a different X-Acto blade. And the most important thing I do, though, after I make the stencil is I coat both sides in a gel medium. The reason I do this is it makes it watertight. I can reuse them again, and it gives them more sturdiness, more resilience. And when doing a stencils, it's also important to know that you have two different stencils really when you make one. You have what you cut out, and then you have the shadow of that basically. So if I was to use this as my stencil, the colors I lay on the background will show everywhere except for where I apply this stencil, because I'm going to use a jet black to fill this in. So basically when it's done, it's going to look like this, like what I cut out. But if I was to do the opposite, I could use this as my stencil and paint over it. I would just see the colors from behind this. So there's a lot of cool effects you can do with that kind of thing. And I have a lot of fun doing this, so I hope you enjoy this as well. The first thing we're going to do is just do a very simple, easy background. I'm just going to take some of the acrylic gouache Lumi Orange. You have to use the Lumi colors in the line. Lumi's for luminescent, because these are the colors that are designed to glow underneath the ultraviolet light or black light. I really don't know why it's called a black light when it glows purple, but who knows. So nice, fairly easy and quick to do. I'm just going to lay in. This is actually going to be an afternoon setting sun. Since we're going to do a little bit of a Halloween theme. Like to set the tone. Now when I'm doing this kind of thing, I like to use a filbert brush like I have here, a Ebony Splendor filbert, because it really helps with the curves when you're trying to do a line to help prevent you getting sharp edges or going outside the lines. And then before I finish, once I kind of get my border all done, I just like to go through and just kind of clean it up a little bit. Try to get it nice and smooth. You might wind up doing another coat. The more coats, you know, it's just going to glow brighter. Okay. And while that's drying, I'm going to jump right into my red. Now, I want to make a point of this, you're going to see here that I have 3 different buckets of water. And this is not because I'm wasteful. The reason I have this is because when you clean off your brush, like I'm doing now, if I was to take this dirty water and put it in front of a black light, it would glow. So a lot of those fluorescent and luminescent pigments stay in the water. So if I was to take this water and then go to a darker color or a different color, say a green, the water of the red color will still be in that green, and it will give me kind of a weird combination of the two. You might want that, but I don't today. So I want to keep my water separate for warm colors, cool colors, and then my blacks. And now I'm just going to lay in a Lumi red sky. If you haven't worked with the acrylic gouache before, it's a very cool product. They make tons of colors, which is part of the real appeal to the line. And they all dry. It's an acrylic, and it dries, and it looks like a gouache, so it has that nice matte finish, which you usually don't achieve with an acrylic paint unless you add special mediums. And even then, you can be cutting down the consistency and the strength of your paint. And then I'm going to just kind of go here and try to straighten that out some. Okay, I'm going to set this aside to dry, and then I'll be right back with you. We'll start our stencil. All right, we're back. We have our dry piece of art, and we are going to apply our stencil. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one with a negative effect first. And to do that, I have this first piece here. And what I'm going to do is first kind of guess where I want my composition to be. And because I want to be able to let the viewer know that this is supposed to be a moon and not just a color gradient, I want to position the bulk of that negative area over a place where it might overlap. So I think I have that down. Now, it's important that when you do your stencil, it has a good seal, otherwise color will leak underneath it. And a good way to go about this is using a rubber cement. Rubber cement will give you a temporary seal. It's removable, and it won't damage the paint, which is, of course, the most important thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is just apply a coat of this rubber cement to my stencil. And then I'm going to want it to not dry, but get a little bit tacky. Usually I'm tacky enough for everything, but... All right, now this is important. I want the illusion that this branch is attached to a tree, so I need to make sure that my stencil starts slightly off the page. Otherwise it'll look like I got a floating branch in the middle of something. So, just like that. All right. Now there's a couple things that I got to do. I'm going to apply some pressure. And then I'm going to look for any leaks. And what I mean by leaks is anytime the rubber cement has gotten squished out from underneath the stencil and onto my art. Because if I paint over that, it will come up, and I'd rather that not have to happen so I get better lines. Okay. I'm going to set this down to dry. I'll be back with you in just a second when it's ready to go. All right, we're back. We've dried. Now you might take a look at this and say, well, it's done. And by all means, it could be done. You don't have to go back and paint this, but because, first of all, we're trying to get the negative effect, but more importantly, we're making a stencil that we want to be reusable. We're just going to go ahead and paint over this and then remove it. So this is where the secret weapon, as I like to call it, comes in. And the secret weapon is the Turner Acrylic Gouache Jet Black. Now, in the past, you're probably familiar, if you've done art for a while, with you know, there's no tube of paint that's just called black in any artist line. It's, you know, Mars black, it's ivory black, bone black. There's all these different blacks, and really what the differences are has to do with a blue tint, a red tint. Sometimes it can be a little bit having to do with the sheen, but only Turner acrylic gouache makes a jet black. And what makes this paint unique is that it dries literally just that, a jet black, and it looks like pure velvet. It dries completely matte, and it mimics that look that blacklight posters often need and have and need, that completely cancels out the light where you don't want it. So a very interesting product and very useful for this type of art. So the first thing now I'm going to do is just go into my black paint and just start applying this as a mask. And as you can probably see, it's fairly opaque. Covers quickly. And even though the stencil's glued down, you still want to be careful around those edges, because again, if paint leaks underneath, you're going to get some stray lines. And if it happens, but we want to try to avoid it if possible. Sometimes you might want to wait for it to dry and put on a second coat to get it extra black, and make sure you got all the gaps that might appear. Now, the last thing you're going to have to look out for is the color is actually going to pool in the corners between your paper and your stencil. And these pools are not ideal. You want to try to minimize them. So you want to go back around it and just pull out any paint that might be hanging out in the corners so that everything dries evenly and as flat as possible. All right. Now, while I'm waiting for this to dry, and I may or may not do a second coat, it's looking fairly well covered. I'm going to bring out another one of these I prepared while we were on break, doing the opposite effect. Here we have the same background, but this time we're going to just have a silhouette. It's very important when you're doing this for the sake of black lighting at least. You don't want to thin down your paint with water very much at all, if any. The water is going to cut the opacity, especially of the black. It's going to thin it and make it more runny, which gives it more opportunity to seep underneath your stencil. And it will cut down in terms of the fluorescent colors, luminescent colors, on their luminancy. So it's important that you keep them as pure as possible. Luminosity. I don't know how to speak. I don't know which word that is. Okay. So now I'm just going to let these dry for a couple minutes, and then I'll be ready to take off the stencil. Now this is the final part, the slightly unnerving part. This is the part where you see how well your stencil held up underneath all the paint. So remember, everything needs to be completely dry, and you want to slowly peel this back. There we go. Now there will be some rubber cement on your art, and if it bothers you and you can see it, you can just use your finger, or you can use a rubber cement pickup and just get that right off. And of course, that's what makes rubber cement such a good option for this is that it doesn't affect the paint and it's removable. Let's see how our other one did here. You might find that even though you thought the entire thing was dry, there might still be some wet paint underneath, so be careful of that. All right. Well, as you can see with this one, it didn't come out as ideal as I would have liked, so what I can do is go back with a brush and just straighten up some of my lines, which isn't too terribly difficult to do. Before I do that, I am going to work on getting some of this rubber cement up. And if it's still wet in some places, that's okay. Just wait for it to completely dry before you try to take it off. Make sure you have clean fingers if possible. Some of these last parts, I'll try to use a little bit of a script lining brush. All right, there we go. So anyway, like I said, it's pretty straightforward, just using stencils and whatnot. And again, remember to make sure to get as much of that rubber cement off as you can if it's still on there. And that's it, you're good to go. So I hope you give it a shot yourself and you have fun. Now that the art is completely finished, this is the time that we finally get to see what it really looks like under the black light. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Ah, yes. The glowing crows, or ravens. They might be roadrunners, but it doesn't matter. The point is you had fun doing it, and it definitely stands out amongst the art on your wall. And I hope you had fun, and you'll give it a shot. Talk to you soon.